All right, guys, welcome back to another episode here. Got something a little bit different for you guys here today. And I want to use the term something pretty cool that I got my hands on, but when it comes down to it, it's kind of depressing. But it is going to be here in the near future probably a good tool uh, as far as something to refer back to in a lot of my videos, possibly when it comes to Lake Okeechobee history and just talking about the status of Lake Okeechobee as a whole. Welcome back to the channel. Those of you that have been following me for a while, if you're new here, this is one of your first videos, or maybe your first video entirely that you've ever clicked on of mine. My name is Cody Davis. I am a full-time guide down here in South Florida. I do run a few trips a year, inshore trips for snook and tarpon. I do dabble in the exotic species trips for the peacock bass, clown knifefish, snakeheads, things along those lines. But primarily 95% of my work is done out here on the big pond on the map behind me, which is Lake Okeechobee. And most of you that are watching follow me for my Lake Okeechobee content, and that is something that I have for you today. And like I said, it's something that's a very good tool to have. I'm really glad I got my hands on it. And it's something that really puts into perspective, I can't say the word, perspective. Am I saying that right? Bear with me. I don't even know. My vocabulary is all off. But it really puts it in plain sight as to the problems Lake Okeechobee is going through, the horrible state it's in, and how simple it really is to fix the problem. And it's something, this is going to go a multitude of directions. I'm going to try and keep it as short as I can for you, but you guys hear me preaching about not only is the spraying hurting the lake, which it definitely is, but how detrimental high water is to the health of Lake Okeechobee and how beneficial a low level lake in the summertime would be for the lake's health. So you guys might look behind me. A lot of you that follow me might see I have some new wall art behind me. First and foremost, we're going to talk about my son's hand-painted frog he painted me at daycare. My 17-month-old, I'm sure he had some assistance with this. But either way, he walked in the door from daycare with his mom. He handed me this plate with a frog on it, and I think it's awesome. So it's fitting because obviously that's one of the best baits to throw out here on Lake Okeechobee. And it's my son's art. So that's probably my favorite piece back here. But the thing we're here to talk about today is this giant chart I have here behind me. Now, it is laminated, so please excuse this glare. And my camera, my picture is just all blurry. So bear with me with that. I got to invest in some better lighting and some better equipment when it comes down to it. But what this chart is, well, first and foremost, this is an FWC chart. This is from them. Some would say it's from the enemy. It's from FWC. All right. This is their chart. And it was given to, or maybe let be borrowed to a colleague of mine, a friend of mine, who will remain nameless, but I kind of stole it. I saw it on his desk. I said, I'm taking this. Maybe he thinks I was going to bring it back, but I'm not. So, sorry, Mike Krause. I'm not going to say his name, though. So, he showed this to me and a good buddy of mine, Chris Sherling. Most of you know him. He's probably taken a lot of your money on Lake Okeechobee. Lake and Sea Mobile Marine, give him a shout out. Me and him were in there, and Mike Krause was showing me this, and we just got talking about the history of the lake. And this is basically a chart that shows a few things, regarding Lake Okeechobee from the year 2003 to 2022. All right, so bear with me. Like I said, I'm hoping you guys can see this, but basically what this is here on the left-hand side is this is the lake level. Okay, so down here we have it down to 5 foot above sea level, and it goes all the way up to 20 foot above sea level. Okay, you have two lines that run horizontally across the entire chart. This marks 15.5 foot and 12 foot, which was the what would you say, that the barrier or the level that the lake, that the Army Corps of Engineers, the state, wanted the lake to average over its entirety, over the entire year. They wanted it to stay between 12 and 15.5 foot. They wanted to stay there permanently, but obviously Mother Nature has some other plans. But that was their what's the word I'm looking for? That was their target level. Okay. Now, has been like this for who knows how long, but as of last year, they passed the bill where now they wanted to bump it up to 13 and a half foot to 17 foot and 17 and a half foot, which for those of you that follow anything that happens on Lake Okeechobee, people like myself, Raymond over there at Roland Martin's Marina, Scott Martin, Mike Krause have all preached how having a lake that high is detrimental to Lake Okeechobee's health when it comes down to it. We'll get into that in a minute. All right, so that's what this was. We have a black line that starts here on the left-hand side and makes its way up and down across to the right side of the chart. This is the water level. This shows where the water level was. And this, like I said, I don't know if I already said this, but this is the year 2003, and it goes all the way to the year 2022 over here, and this just shows the water level average over that time. We've got some green lines that make their way from the bottom of the chart up to the top, and these are the acres of submerged vegetation that they surveyed on the lake for each year, all right? And really, I believe that's it, and then there's some notes that are intermixed in here. So we're going to start on this side. We're going to go from 2003 to 2006, okay? Lake Okeechobee at this time was still a bucket list fishery. Everyone in the bass fishing world knew about Lake Okeechobee. It was a phenomenal fishery. It was known for its thick grass and all that, right? But back in the day there were still a lot of 10-pounders caught, and there was probably more 10-pounders caught then, double-digit fish, we should say, than ever again. But it wasn't an amazing tournament lake, and what I mean by that is, like, back then, for the most part, obviously we're talking over an average. If you had 20 pounds or so, you were doing damn good. If that's the dummy way. That's the Cody Davis way of putting it, all right? Now, keep in mind, I was very young at this time. I wasn't fishing tournaments very often out here, if ever. But that was kind of the way the lake was, all right? It was still a great fishery, but the cool thing about it, like me and Chris were talking about, and probably a reason why it was the way it was you could fish everywhere. Clean water was not a problem. It was just, the whole lake was fishable. And it was probably at some of its healthiest, in the healthiest state it had ever been in. You might only go catch 20 pounds, but literally when if you had a 80 boat tournament, the idea of not seeing a boat all day, that was the norm, okay? Tons of cattails, tons of narrow boat trails. A lot of you have maybe seen the videos of people running the boat lanes and things. But keep in mind, at this time, also, like, the south end of the lake was almost wide open. If you go down here and look at this map, we're all accustomed to this map here, but when you came through Boy Scout Cut, it was open water. There wasn't cattails or anything like that. Grassy Island was there, but it was all submerged grass, pepper grass, eelgrass, things like that. And here's another thing. You can see here, the lake was very high. All right. The lake was 17 and a half to 18 foot. It got up to almost 18 foot on an average. Right here, a hurricane. So let's see, 90 days from September 22nd, 2004 to December 20th, 2004, the lake peaked and stayed at an average of 18 foot, and we had a hurricane, all right? Now, here's the thing. People keep saying, I don't know what's the big deal is about you with the high water. The lake used to be high all the time back in the day. That's true. But back in the day, we had, here in 2004, there was 45,000 acres of submerged vegetation on the lake. That's eelgrass, hydrilla, peppergrass, shrimp grass, you name it. Submerged vegetation. That's not counting cattails, tules, bulrush, things like that. The hard line around the lake was much thicker and stronger back then, so it protected the backwaters, the fishable areas from the muddy water, the rough water, the waves rolling back there, and not only dirtying up the areas, but just making it unfishable due to your boat coming out of the water and things like that. Keep in mind, this high water is what took those hard lines away over time. All right. So yes, the lake did used to be high, but there was a lot more grass. There was a lot more sheltered areas to be able to fish, clean water, fishable areas, spawning areas for these fish to use. When now there's not. All right. Looks like here in 2006 is from 183 days. We added Hurricane Wilma, but at July 25th, 2005 through January 6th of 2006, the lake stayed at 17 foot, 17 and a half foot for 183 days. Long time, okay? But now keep in mind, look, it stayed up here, and look how much the grass decreased. Submerged vegetation decreased in Lake Okeechobee. 2004, we had 45,000 acres on the lake. The following year, from that lake being that high for that long, it went down to around 12,000. And then in 2006, we were down to 4,000, which is nothing. All right. So now you're moving through from 2006 to 2007. You can see we have a major drawdown. But as this lake is coming down, notice once 2007 hits, we are all the way back up to almost 3,000 acres of submerged vegetation. I'm sorry, not 3,000, 30,000. I think I had the numbers wrong. We're in tens of thousands of acres here. So we're up to 29,000 acres, I'm going to say. You got 10,000, 20,000, 30, 40, 50, so on. And this is all due to that lake dropping down to that 13, 12 and a half foot lake. All right. 2007 keeps on rolling through, and we get down to here. I remember my dad taking me out of school to drive up to the lake to walk across Boy Scout Cut, kick up dust. All right. The lake got down to 9 foot, a 9 foot average, and it stayed in this low average for 587 days. I ran that by my father-in-law the other day. He's like, I didn't remember it being that long, but this was from January 11th, 2007 to August 19th, 2008 right here. Insane, but keep in mind, look at what's happening with the submerged vegetation. Over the course of this drawdown, we went from, I'm going to say 3,000 acres of submerged vegetation up to about 28, 29,000, up to 35,000. All right, a lot more vegetation. And on top of that, once this lake started coming back up as well, this is where, once we get into these next 7 years or so, this was Lake Okeechobee's heyday. This is what everyone knew Lake Okeechobee for. So you have 2008, here comes the water back up, and I'm saying comes back up, it still peaks at 15 foot average. All right, we're at 15, almost just under 15 and a half foot now. We're at a 15 and a half foot lake, and look at the submerged vegetation come 2009. We're up to 52,000 acres of submerged vegetation around the entirety of the lake. All right. Now keep in mind that this lake is staying at that 12 to 15 foot average. All right. Comes up through here. We have a couple of drawdowns here. Mid 2009, we have it down to 10 and a half foot for 77 days on average through the months of March through July, which that is the peak time to have the low water. All right, the fish aren't spawning. They don't need the backwater areas. The bluegill are coming in to spawn. All the fish, all the life is on the outside grass lines of the lake anyway, and this is the peak time where we have stable weather. It's not blowing. It's not silting in. This is a good time. And this is, keep in mind, like I said, back here in this time when the lake was at the all-time low, this is where the state came in and literally upgraded the lake. Scraping projects were being done. When you guys are up there, Tin House, Indian Prairie, Buckhead Ridge, and you look back at the hard line, you see those high spots, those tree islands where there's legit trees growing back, a few hundred yards back behind the hard line. Those are scrape areas. Those are legitimately places where dozers were out on the lake, the same stretches that we throw big easies and speedworm and frog and chatterbait today. Back then, this was a construction zone. You can go back and look on Google Earth where they were literally scraping the lake and scraping the sludge and the soot into piles, and that's what those high spots are where those trees are. Keep in mind, the lake was so low, Harney Pond was dry. You could not fish in here. You couldn't get in here. The water's edge, essentially that was fishable, was even from the tip of horse to Widdens and the outside of Bird. Okay, that's how low this was. This was all dozers, and the pictures are crazy if you go look at it, all right? But following that drought were the best years Lake Okeechobee had ever seen, all right? So you got 2010. The submerged vegetation, you could see, it stays relatively on track. I mean, you're staying above 30,000 acres of submerged vegetation here from the years 2010, really all the way to 2015, so for 5 years. Obviously, it's going to drop from the over 50,000, from the 52,000, because the lake's going to come up, and gradually a lot of that grass is going to drown out that was offshore. When this looked like this, the poles on the shoal, fourth pole, first pole, all the way from Cochran's almost to Widdens, the submerged eelgrass and the hydrilla was growing all the way out to those poles. That was essentially the hard line. Now, all of you that fish the lake know from the poles to the hard line is nearly a quarter mile. That's how much that grass has been drawn back. Both the submerged and the emergent vegetation. All right. You get down here into 2011, the lake comes back down. We have another low lake, 9.5 foot. And just like that, here comes the submerged vegetation spiking back up to 45,000 acres again. And keep in mind, now in this is when Brandon McMillan set the record, 106 pounds for 4 days. This is when Ish Monroe won, flipping the jig in East Wall, having those multiple 30-pound days. And these are top-level Elite Series tournaments that were happening. FLW started the FLW Tour every year on Okeechobee, and this was the heyday. And this is kind of when I personally came back to the lake. And this is when I started seeing it firsthand on basically a weekly basis. But another thing to keep in mind is every time you see this black line spike high, you notice immediately following a high spike here, you have a drawdown in submerged vegetation. And that's because you're losing so much. Now, we'll get into this here in a second. So, you get into 2017, you have a really high lake. I remember this, the lake at 16 foot. And then we have a somewhat of a drawdown where the lake was 13 foot. And right around in here, if you notice, every time the lake comes back down, we're not seeing a major spike in submerged vegetation. What's funny is, around here, that 2016 mark, is where the spraying problem had really gotten out of control. Over the years here, there were sprayers. We were having spraying because we all know, or anyone with a brain knows, that you do have to spray to some extent. But this is where you started seeing the videos of the irresponsible spraying happening, not just to Lake Okeechobee, but to all the lakes around the state of Florida. People literally just spraying in 20-mile-an-hour winds, fairy wanding their spray stick, just littering not just hydrilla and hyacinth and water lettuce, but just coating our native species like our cattails, our peppergrass, our pennyworts, submerged and emergent vegetation. And obviously, even the drawdowns aren't enough to bring back um, a lot of the submerged vegetation. Now, we did have a little bit of a drawdown here, and we did get it back up in this area. Um, I'm going to say in this spike here, this is most of this 25,000 acres was in Harney Pond. Harney Pond still had tons of hydrilla. This is when Jesse Mizell won like 4 out of the 5 BFLs that year. Never left the pond. We had a good number of submerged vegetation here. We had a low lake for 63 days from April 16th all the way to July 17th of 2017. But then immediately they just spiked this, right back up to a 17-foot lake. So what's happening is then when you bring the water up that fast, you have a low lake, you get new growth, you get seedlings when it comes down to it, but the water rises entirely too fast and it drowns out anything that you just started, and you have to start over. And when it did that, we went all the way down to around 5,000 acres, 5,000 acres of submerged vegetation. 2019, it says we were up to 27,000 acres, something like that. And I'm going to say most of that was in. Well, no, I do remember this. This is when we first started seeing eelgrass from the hog pen here, just south of Uncle Joe's Cut, literally all the way up the lake. A lot of the hydrilla at this time had been sprayed to death in Harney Pond after that, but we did have a lot of eel and peppergrass, really all the way from the hog pen all the way up to Buckhead Ridge. And that's where this really came into play. But then obviously after that, you see that it was going down. Now, keep in mind, this is around the time right here, 2020, when COVID hit. And a lot of you remember we did have a very low lake. Here it says it averaged out at, well, that's probably about right. I don't think it really got into the 9-foot, but it was at 10 for a long time. This is, honestly, it's dead on. 71 days. March 28th through July 7th of 2020, which is right because COVID went rampant that March. I remember I was watching Breezy fish a Toyota series on the shoal, and I had 33 cancellations in 2 hours of people canceling trips. Because that was March is when COVID hit. And right about here was the best fishing I've ever encountered or ever went through on Lake Okeechobee. Fishing down there on Long Point, fishing in 1.5 feet of water, flipping a jig, legitimately catching 70 fish a day, every day. And we had the whole lake to ourselves because every boat ramp was closed except for Clewiston. So I was literally leaving my house, driving to Clewiston, putting the boat in, and running back to Belglade to fish. Awesome stuff. But you could see here, we didn't get a big explosion in submerged vegetation the following year. Why? Because the amount of spraying happening on the lake is just uncontrolled. It's insane. I know I sound like an idiot rambling, but that's the cause. Why did it happen every time here? Every time the lake dropped, we had a spike until about that 2016 when the spraying got rampant. And now look, I want you guys to see something. 2022, there is not enough submerged vegetation on Lake Okeechobee at all for them to even survey it. We are down to 0 acres of submerged vegetation on Lake Okeechobee. I'm sure it's not technically 0. I know of some little spots where there is some eelgrass. They have legitimately sprayed this place to death, and obviously they have the lake over the last year and a half entirely too high, in my opinion. Keep in mind, that's not even counting the cattails, the hard lines that border the spawning areas and protect these fishable areas from muddy water and heavy winds. This is just submerged vegetation. Hydrilla, peppergrass, eelgrass, things like that. But keep in mind that that's our filter. That's what cleans the water. The water, muddy water gets through those cattails. That's not doing really any filtering. The eelgrass and the submerged grass is what's literally stopping the muddy water and filtering it as it goes through. And now we literally have none. or not enough to even account for, um, which is insane. It's crazy. And what blows my mind. Oh, here's the other topic. So while we were having this conversation, I asked Mike, "It's a shame you can't see how much they're spraying," and he informed me that you can. We went through the numbers, and this is what's crazy. You could literally look at it's documented. It is public information on myfwc.com. You can literally click on your lake, and you can go back 100 years, not 100, but far back, and you can legitimately see how much money they spent on not just spraying the lake, how much money they spent on spraying each specific species of invasive plant on Lake Okeechobee. Okay, and around this time, we looked. They didn't spend a dime on hydrilla, $0, because there was none left. Now, hydrilla is not a native plant. It's not supposed to be here. Okay, so I get it. But they spent, I want to say it was $1.4 million on floating plant matter, being hyacinth and water lettuce. $1.4 million. And it shows how many acres they sprayed as well. The crazy thing is, when you start looking at the numbers, do they vary? A little bit. But on average, there's really no difference between the amount of spraying they're doing or the amount of money, which accounts for how much chemical is being used, that they're putting in this lake from here to back here. When the submerged vegetation is literally non-existent, but here there's 50,000 acres, 40,000 acres of vegetation. And I know they're only spraying for invasives, but still. How is the amount of tax dollars being put into this project not drastically down? It's basically flatlined from here all the way through here, when you could see that the submerged vegetation is all the way down. That's what's not only pissing me off, but it's just crazy. They have that 10-year contract, and they are going to use that chemical one way or the other. They don't care if they're spraying it on concrete, if they're pulling the plugs on their tanks, which we've all had videos of them doing. We all have videos and have seen these guys on their phones watching a YouTube channel just letting that Roundup just spray into the wind, because they are told if they come back with chemical in that tank, they don't have a job anymore. So they're legitimately spraying everything. Someone in our federal government needs to take a look at this, and the numbers don't make sense. Is it going to take people out of a job? Yeah, most likely. But you can't keep dumping millions upon millions of dollars on chemical into this natural resource when it only needs, at this point, none. There's a lot of people that say stop spraying. There does need to be some spraying done on any body of water. It does need to be somewhat managed. And I know it's hard, when it comes to boat ramp basins, when it comes to some navigational canals, like maybe the 7 Mile Ditch or Sportsman's Cut or Government Cut up on the top, or maybe Buckhead Canal, Indian Prairie Canal, things like that. There is stuff that does need to be managed. But you're talking literally hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars that it would take. Basically what I'm saying is, this is why I say we need a drought so bad. It's because of this right here. This lake was low. It was almost unfishable. Mike Krause will tell you his shop will not survive another one of this, but he begs for it every day. Because there's a select few that were getting out on the lake and fishing, but for the most part, people were scared to run it. It was treacherous. It was super low. But following that were, literally 6 or 7 years, well, really 8 years of the best fishing you could ever ask for. right. This is when Jimmy and Brandon had the 42 pounds. Jared and Jimmy had 37 the next weekend. Brandon set the record all the time. I mean, this is what made Lake Okeechobee what it is today. And now we're all the way down to something that we never thought it would be. So, pretty cool chart. I'm going to leave this up because, like I said, this is something I'll probably refer back to in a lot of my videos. But just let that sink in. I mean, there's not even enough vegetation, submerged vegetation on this lake for them to account for. And they're still spraying. They're still spraying each and every day. I encountered 3 spray boats out there today. It's terrible. You know, a lot of these guys, they used to post when they were going to spray and where, what sections of the lake, and they stopped, and people were upset about that. The reason they stopped is because these sprayers were getting harassed. They were getting their lives threatened. They were getting, things were happening, and I get it. We can't handle it like that, but at the same time, when people start seeing, I'm 31 years old. People I fish against that are in their 60s have literally watched this happen, on a weekly basis all the way to now, and they're pissed off and tired about it, and tired of seeing it. At this rate, if we don't do something right now, there's not going to be a chart because there's not going to be a Lake Okeechobee. And I know they want to turn this thing into a reservoir. They want this map to look like this right here, just like Lake St. Clair. Blue, no grass, and they can hold this sumbitch all the way up to 20 foot and hold water, and they can build more houses in our state. Our state's overpopulated, and not just Lake Okeechobee. I feel like every waterway, fresh and salt both, in our state is mismanaged in a way we never thought it would be. And I'm not sure what it's going to take to get something fixed. The reason we are all here in Florida is because of the water, and we just do a horrible job managing it. So if any of you guys have any questions, there are some little notes in here. I just don't want to bore you guys to death and go through the whole thing. And I'm sure, like I said, over time I'll be referring back to this deal. But any questions as far as what the lake used to look like, or if I ever sell this, or if I haven't, I'm sure I have people that do. What major changes the lake's gone through over the last few years, whatever. Leave them in the comments and let me know. We've been having some meetings with some higher ups in the federal, in our government here to try and get this problem fixed. I just hope people spread the word. Follow A-Flow on social media, Anglers for Lake Okeechobee. Do your part. Try to spread. This lake needs help. I know I sound like I have a biased opinion. I'm biased because I make my living on this lake, but it's not that. It is obviously that, but it's because I love this lake, and I love all the fisheries. I love all Florida's fishery as a whole, whether it's the inshore, whether it's fishing in Stewart in the Indian River, whether it's fishing the Caloosahatchee River on the west coast, whether it's fishing offshore off of Pompano Beach, or if it's bass fishing on Lake Okeechobee or Kissimmee or Toho or whatever it might be. I just want a healthy fishery for the state. So let me know what you guys think. I just wanted to share that with you guys. Sorry I went on a little bit long, and I appreciate you guys watching. Leave any comments or any questions you have, concerns in the comment section. I'll be sure to answer them on this one, and share the video. This is something that needs to be seen, and that's, like I said, that's as black and white as it gets. And that's not a doctored chart. That is straight from my FWC. So hopefully we can get something figured out here. Spraying is a huge problem, but high water is just as detrimental, if not worse, also. So we just need to get all this stuff figured out. Appreciate you guys watching, and I guess I'll see you guys on the next one. Tight lines.